All right, I'm Hannah Kramer. I'm here to say a few words before we jump into today's presentations. This is LB&L's team, hold on here, in the Smart Energy Analytics campaign. And I wanted to acknowledge their great work on this program just to start off today's call. We're excited that we have 88 people signed up for today's webinar, which really shows the great interest in building analytics. We have a mix of building owners and managers, EMIS vendors, MBCX service providers, and other supporting partners to the campaign. So welcome. A few quick housekeeping items. We're recording today's presentation for our own records, and we'll be posting on the website for all to view there, and we'll also be sending out the slide deck to you all. Please ask questions throughout the presentation via the chat function at the bottom of your screen. All those chats will go to Elliot Crow, and he will be aggregating those for the end of the call there. So we'll do Q&A at the end. So for those of you that are on the call and aren't familiar with the Smart Energy Analytics campaign, I'll give just real brief highlights here. The purpose of the campaign is to help owners use EMIS and monitoring-based commissioning, the process that uses energy management information system tools to increase energy savings. And really the whole purpose of the campaign is to provide resources that will support new EMIS projects, encourage expansion, help those that are well down their road on their EMIS implementation. So we provide technical assistance to all participants. We also develop aggregate metrics on things like the types of systems people are using, the costs, the savings they're seeing. And all these all these research results will be presented in our year 2 report, which will be available this October. Currently, we have our year 1 report that's been available since last October to see our initial results. We also recognize participant exemplary performance through annual awards, and we have lots of mini case studies on all the folks that have done a great job with their EMIS implementation and received awards. So we're still accepting new participants, and please consider joining us. Very quick announcements for the participants in the campaign. Please make sure you've updated participant actions. Thank you for everyone who's already done that. Hooray. And if you have any problems at all, just reach out to us if you need help. One interesting aspect about this is that we're able to provide you feedback individually on where you land in the range of costs and energy savings once we have all the data submitted and analyzed. So this can be helpful as you assess expanding your installation or just want to see sort of a benchmark. We obviously don't disclose who has what, but we can show where you exist in the range. Another quick announcement, fall recognition and awards are fast approaching. Submission is really easy. All you need to do is submit your participant actions, and then we'll determine if you qualify as a new installation. So there's no additional awards form this fall, which is a change from last fall. So if you have any questions, just let us know. And these are the awards for this fall: New Installation Award and MBCX Provider Award. Okay, and again, just a reminder, please send your chats to Elliot Crow with your questions. Do it, early and often, and he'll get them organized for us at the end for Q&A. Okay, so what we'll cover today. Last November, just sort of a little flashback there, we had a webinar called Getting the Most Out of Your EIS, and we covered the features of the EIS, what metrics are useful, and a lot of the nitty-gritty of what charts to look at and just the top 10 options that we're seeing out there. Now we move on to how companies are setting up these features for their portfolios. So today's webinar has some very knowledgeable speakers talking about their stories on how they did this. So we have Becca Russian and Ed Bassford will be co-presenting, and Becca's from Jamestown, a real estate investment company and operator, and Ed is with Lincoln Property Company, who works in partnership with Jamestown in their building operations. And we also have Ryan Tynes with Tishman Speyer, a real estate company that acquires, develops, and operates property. So I'm really excited about them sharing their experiences. But before we get to the main highlight of the presentation, which is their presentations, I'm going to give you a little background on EMIS and monitoring-based commissioning to kind of get us all on the same page of what we're talking about with these terms. So this presentations are focused on energy information systems, and that's this portion of EMIS tools that use meter and sub-meter data. So energy information systems usually have hourly or more frequent data and help you visualize that data, perform analytics, and get specific things that you can take actions on. So the more advanced they are, the more analytic horsepower they have to help direct you to particular anomalies in your data. You use these tools in a monitoring-based commissioning process where you collect your data, you analyze it, and then you use that data also to verify that you've made improvements. So we really see, tools go hand in hand with a process to use those tools. And through the campaign, we don't promote any particular vendor because we really feel and have seen over and over that as long as you use your tools and you have good training and know how to use your tools, any tool is going to give you good information to use in your process, and it's all about how you leverage that data. So as a big picture, when we talk about dashboards, we're talking about kind of two different levels. I just wanted to define this here. So we have energy dashboards, which is kind of what we focus on with energy information systems, but they've definitely expanded into things like waste and water, other utilities. But these dashboards are both at the portfolio level for campuses and portfolios of buildings of any type, and then at the building level. So we're going to see examples in these presentations coming up here on what a portfolio level dashboard tends to look like and what building level tends to look like. We see energy managers and sustainability managers getting the most benefit out of the portfolio level because they are having to look across the portfolio, maybe benchmark buildings against each other and understand which buildings to prioritize for retrofits or for operational improvements. And the building levels, obviously, the building engineers digging in deeper to what's happening at their site. The dashboards also are supplemented by, a lot of times they have application dashboards. So it gives you all these different options for which analytics to choose or which data management tools are available through your energy information system. So we'll see some examples of the applications as well. There's different communication paths. So you can view online, real-time energy data. You can get email and text alerts when things are out of range or summary reports. Setting up reporting is another aspect of setting up your energy information system to meet the needs of various stakeholders. Okay, here's a few shots of portfolio level dashboards. This is just an example from UC Davis where they have, they start out their main dashboard with a map and you can drill into each individual building on campus. The radius of those circles is the amount of energy they use, and the color is the building type. So it's kind of a nice visual there. And then you can drill in and rank based on energy use intensity. And this is all publicly available website here. This is another example from LBNL's energy information system where they're looking at, different energy use intensities of different building groupings that make sense. So lab buildings separate from office, gas EUI, and overall energy EUI and electricity EUI. So these charts can be helpful in prioritizing and also looking at the same period of previous years. Then we have diving into the building level. These are actually from Becca's presentation, so I'm not going to talk much about the details, but the idea here is that you have some details on individual buildings, and this is kind of the starting off point for a building engineer looking on a day-to-day, on a week-to-week basis for how their building's operating. I also mentioned that there's these data management applications, which can be really helpful as you're trying to figure out whether you have any data quality problems. So as part of your energy information system, often these applications are kind of embedded in it and allow you to look at things like here. There's sort of a visual look at if there's missing data. Here shows what, on the right side here whether meters are online or offline. So these are useful tools. I'd also like to give a recognition to Macalester College. There was a student at Macalester College, Tom Panic, who has developed their EIS more or less on his own with the support of the facilities team at Macalester, as well as some guidance here at the campaign. So you'll see some graphics going forward from their EIS that he developed. Here's an analysis applications dashboard. It's like a jumping off point for applications, which take you then to a place where you can select your building in the portfolio. And you can customize these to whichever apps are most useful to you. And then drilling into those apps, here's just a few examples of, actually from Macalester College again. So this is just showing some examples of what's possible with meter data. Heat maps are quite common. We've looked at these before. These make it easy to see how today's energy use compares to historical. The calendar view here in the lower left corner helps you look at the daily energy use compared to the historical usage of that day. So the red days mean that that particular day's consumption was higher than normal, and it can kind of help you sort of look at patterns more easily for an entire month. And then in the bottom right, this one is interesting. This is the base to peak load ratio, which is a metric that helps identify which buildings have high base load, so you can try to work on turning things off at night and so forth. So this is a metric you can compare across your whole portfolio to see kind of how you rank. And finally, another section of drill down apps for monitoring and verification. This is becoming more popular for, you gather all this energy information system data anyway, all the meter data, and using that to verify savings is a really helpful thing. So in these particular instances, the systems are creating a model of expected energy use. So you'll see these things called projected baselines, and then they're comparing to actual energy use to determine savings. So if you have questions about how these models are created and all that kind of M&V details, we'd be happy to talk through that with you. Okay, so that was the overview. I want to move now to introducing Becca and Ed. So Becca is the Vice President of Sustainability and Corporate Social Responsibility at Jamestown. She leads initiatives through the Jamestown Green Program and the Jamestown's Charitable Foundation. Prior to joining Jamestown in 2012, Becca worked as a local government consultant for Clark Patterson Lee, where she served as a Community Development Coordinator and Sustainability Commission Staff Liaison for the City of Dunwoody. She's a Certified Energy Manager and holds a LEED AP O&M credential. So thank you so much, Becca, for joining us. We also have Becca's colleague, Ed Bassford, who has an extensive career over 33 years in the engineering industry with a primary focus on commercial projects in the Washington, D.C. metro area. He's currently Director of Engineering for the Jamestown Urban Management Portfolio, and he's focused on developing engineering policies, efficient building operations, maintenance, training and development, and implementing energy and environmental sustainability initiatives for the portfolio. Prior to his career in property management, Ed served as an engineer in the U.S. Navy. I'm also going to introduce Ryan, so then we don't have to switch back and forth. Ryan Tynes oversees a broad range of sustainability initiatives in commercial real estate in his role as Director of Sustainability with Tishman Speyer. Ryan focuses on creating value by reducing operating expenses and increasing operational efficiencies, along with driving revenue through demand response and other utility programs. He manages the company's LEED and Energy Star eco-labeling activities, investor reporting, and is currently developing and implementing Tishman Speyer's health and wellness strategy for existing buildings. So thank you for all our speakers for presenting. I'm going to turn it over now to Becca. I will stop sharing my screen and she will share hers.
Great. Hopefully everybody can see my screen. Thank you, Hannah, for the introduction, and thanks to the Smart Energy Analytics team for setting this up and having us on the webinar today. I think you've sufficiently introduced Ed and myself, but just to familiarize you all with Jamestown a little bit, we're a vertically integrated real estate operator with about 20 million square feet in assets across the U.S. Jamestown Green is our sustainability program, and that was created in 2012 as a way to really formalize our commitment to sustainability, and that was in response to increasing stakeholder questions and expectations regarding our performance. We've got a couple slides that really kind of drill down on our EIS platform, so we'll talk a little bit about the timeline of our EIS use. We'll use some dashboards that we use to kind of show that portfolio and property level perspective, and then talk about some stuff that we plan to do moving forward. So part of formalizing our commitment, as part of that, we set a 20% energy reduction target, which was later revised, and you can see our targets on the right-hand side of the slide. You know, we set these goals like a lot of companies did, and then we immediately kind of went to work to make sure that we were doing what we needed to do to make progress towards these goals. And that's really when we started to take a focus and a closer look at this idea of building level energy management. So you're looking at a timeline here, and Ed and I were both around in 2013 when we brought our first 5 buildings online with an EIS. You know, we started with 5 buildings. It was 2 in New York, 2 in DC, and 1 in San Francisco. And at that time, we targeted assets that had, you know, relatively high energy consumption and teams that we thought could benefit from the software. Along the way, you know, we've used different providers. The providers have kind of shifted a little bit in their delivery model and some of the functionality of their individual platforms. But one of our biggest kind of challenges was just varying use by the facility managers, especially, you know, some using different softwares and having some features that were automated and others that weren't. And so without there being a ton of consistency in how the tools are being used, we really targeted that as an area where we could work with the Smart Energy Analytics campaign team on a better, more formal implementation model, just so that we could maximize the value of these platforms and ultimately celebrate the operational achievements of the teams and make them look good, which is what I like to tell them my job is. So for the rest of the slides, we'll focus on AquaCore. AquaCore was brought to Jamestown through their partnership with Lincoln Property Company, who is our joint venture partner for a number of our properties. And so the next few slides will show our screenshots from our AquaCore dashboard. I'm going to start by talking about the portfolio perspective, and then I'll let Ed take over and probably chime in a bit as he's talking about the property perspective. So for me as a program manager, I'm often looking at this, you know, high-level summary of all of our buildings and kind of looking at this roll-up perspective. So, you know, this is just an example, you know, current week compared to last week, current month compared to the trailing month. Just a quick kind of at-a-glance screenshot. And in the upper right-hand corner, that's our like-for-like energy use. So that's, you know, portfolio-wide, we saw a 3.2% reduction for buildings owned in 2016 and 2017. And so that's the number that ultimately gets rolled out and published in my annual report. But of course, in order to achieve that number, it really comes down to the day-to-day operations of the building. And so part of my practice, and Ed does the same thing, is to look at this dashboard and try and target large increases or even decreases if we find that something positive is going on. It's not shown on this slide, but we also have peak demand on our portfolio dashboard as well as demand per square foot. But really, once you see this portfolio-wide perspective, if there's anything that you need to drill down in deeper, you really have to look at the property level to kind of see what might be going on. And Ed, feel free to chime in, and I can keep advancing these slides. But at the property level, we use automated emails, the dashboards, which we'll show you, and those come out at a minimum weekly. There's also a few other kind of applications within the software that are shown on the screen now, and we're not going to dig into those a ton, but many of these softwares have a lot of capabilities that can be utilized. Ed, do you want to talk about this property level dashboard?
There's the property level information that our engineers would typically work with. In the upper portion of the screen, you can see the usage, off-peak and on-peak. As we all know, on-peak demand is very costly to our clients, and controlling on-peak is one of the things that we really focus on doing. The base loads, or with the predictive load in the kWh, and we have the current week of electrical usage with the trailing week in the light below.
And the only thing that I'll add there, sorry Ed, is that for demand, that's something that could help us maybe target a project like battery storage to help reduce our peak demand. And so that's just something that could come out of this information.
Next screen. So this is our peak demand at the building, showing the actual peaks on any given day. So we can set targets in AquaCore. We can get alerts when we're approaching peak demand so that we can do load shedding. Right now, we're still working on getting our peak demands for each property really fine-tuned on where those alarms will be. But this is a good feature that our guys are using daily. So consumption versus target. We worked with Hannah and her group to set up target energy usage, just building the screens. As you can see, where our target energy usage for our energy usage is way above target, and that's another thing that we're fine-tuning now for each building, so that we can have a target and the engineers have a target to work with on a monthly basis.
And one thing that I didn't state, but what you see in the upper right-hand corner is what shows up on the actual dashboard homepage. And then when you click on the details, that's when you see the more detailed consumption information below.
So, yep, base load versus target load again. Basically the same type of energy that we're looking at nighttime shutdown. And what our target should be at night versus where we're actually at. Early on with our first venture into EIS, it was interesting because we had a building in DC that had a little spike at night, and I kept getting these reports, and it had this little 200 kW bounce coming up every night at the same time, and we couldn't figure out what it was. We're looking at this energy. So we do quarterly inspections of our properties at night, but it prompted us to come in and take a look, and what we found was that the firmware on one of our SCU controllers had failed, and the optimal start-stop had decided that it took from midnight to 8 a.m. to cool the building for 8 a.m. startup. It was a firm where there was nothing in the VAS, there was no alarms, nothing sent. This was just a small blip on a graph that it stood out enough that we looked into it. And I think it was about $14,000 worth of energy savings in a year just from that small blip in that graph.
Ed, and that's a great example where we were able to make the building team look good, right? I mean, those are like the holy grail of stories that everybody wants with software like this. And so, you know, I'd also add that that was a few years ago. And so over time, you know, you might occasionally level out as your operations normalize, but it's not uncommon to see things like that creep back in over time. And that's where the software can really be valuable. This is just the last 3 widgets on the property level dashboard. You know, the ranking of the properties is really easy. You could rank by consumption or by demand, and that's really easy to manipulate in the software. I just kind of did the top, you know, the 4 top ones just to save space. And I think you really like that predictive band chart that's shown in the middle.
Yeah, I find it interesting. And like I said, if we fine tune that predictive band a little bit, it'll be a great tool for the engineers. It can also normalize by weather. There's just a lot of information here. I know it's difficult to see the lighter blue line and in the graph, but for an engineer that's operating a building day to day, he can check this against his temperature, against his load, and it's a great tool for him to analyze how his plant's running.
Yeah. The last thing we wanted to show you is something at the property level. And this is essentially hourly data overlaying like the weekday and weekend schedule. So visually you can see if it's in time when you should be having a higher base load, and if it corresponds to that schedule, so you can see how you're performing. You know, what I noticed when I looked at this, and Ed and I chatted about this, was that the weekdays, for the most part, and those are the kind of lighter purple days, you know, those look pretty in line, but the weekends have some variation. And one of the things that Ed and I kind of talked about was that this building has a church that operates on Saturdays and Sundays, which might be causing some of that. And then the other thing, which we were both, you know, pleased by, was that you can see there's on the bottom chart, there's kind of a midweek, very low base load. And it's on July 4th when the building was, you know, for the most part unoccupied, and I can only assume that the church wasn't operating. So, you know, had it not been a holiday, that would definitely be something that we would check, or had the graph shown the opposite. But this is just an example of how you can use some of these perspectives to kind of to check how you are operating and compare it to how you anticipate the building to operate. You just wanted to wrap up by talking about some of our refinements that we're looking to implement moving forward. We've talked a lot about just standardizing the dashboards and taking some deeper dives with the teams to make sure that their kind of targets and alert thresholds are really fitting for the operation of their buildings. Some other things that I think has been useful for us is Aquacore recently rolled out a mobile app, which is just another way to kind of make it easier for the building staff in particular to pull up this information and, you know, make notes when they're in the field. You know, once we kind of button all this up, we plan to do a webinar, probably celebrate some of our engineers that have really used the tool, taken advantage of its offerings, and then also kind of expand our use of some of the other, you know, modules and apps, such as, you know, the tenant billing or the public display, and even the project center to try and kind of validate some of the savings. You know, I think just to wrap up is, you know, for us, we're always kind of refining how we utilize these resources, especially as the tools themselves evolve and change and our building needs shift. But, you know, I think there's just a ton of value in sharing with peers and kind of taking advantage of the free resources that are available, such as, you know, the Better Buildings and the Smart Energy Analytics campaign. You know, for us, it's helped us really make sure we're getting bang for our buck in terms of our use of these projects, because obviously they do come at a cost. But, you know, we look forward to kind of the continued refinement of our own processes. So that's it. I'm going to stop sharing so Ryan can take over.
Thanks so much, Becca and Ed. That was really great. Thanks for showing the details of all your screens. And we're going to save the questions that have come in till the end in the interest of time. So, Ryan, I'll let you take it away. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much. It's great to be here. I appreciate everyone taking some time to talk about dashboards. And thank you to Hannah and the LBL team for letting us present today. So let me just get this started, and here we go. So similar to Becca, Tishman Speyer is a fully vertically integrated real estate company. So we develop, we own, and we manage our assets. But more importantly, all of our engineers work for us. So I want to give a little bit of background to kind of how we got to where we are as an organization. So as Hannah mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, there's a whole variety of dashboards that are out there. Everything from Energy Star, which is very manual and rear looking, to a fully integrated system that talks to your BMS, that's doing automated fault detection diagnostics, and then is automatically controlling your buildings, setting set points based on how an algorithm thinks the building should be performing. So for us, we kind of wanted to be right in the middle of those two extrema. We had some security concerns with putting our BMSs online. We have some union concerns with putting in a system that's going to start operating the building automatically. And then we had some logistics concerns when you try and install a system that's going to talk to every BMS in our 64 building portfolio. We've got so many different vintages that just the exercise of trying to connect up those was not something we thought we could do in a reasonable timeline. So because of those concerns, we really focused on kind of the system we have up on the screen now. So our asset level, at the asset level, we're taking a look at all of our base building meters. So our electric, our gas, and our water. Basically anything that can have a pulse output, we're trying to collect. And then we installed a system of data loggers in all of our buildings that collects the meter data and then sends that out to the cloud. And then once the data is out there, we are able to have our dashboard provider, Mach Energy, grab that data and then perform analytics, provide back to our engineers and our operating team. Okay, and kind of along with that, it was really important for us to make sure that we got the buy-in of our operators the whole time. I mean, Becca mentioned multiple times how they use the software to really promote and highlight any savings that have happened in the building level. And that's important for us too. We want to make sure that engineers view this as a tool that they can use to do their job better, and not something that we're bringing in to, kind of big brother over them or ultimately take over their job. So for us, it was really important to get that buy-in up front with the engineers. So we actually included them in the procurement process. So we originally went out to 11 vendors with an executive team search team and our procurement group, we ultimately whittled that down to 4 based on the scope that we needed and then pricing from the vendors. And then we ultimately went on a roadshow with all of these vendors to each region and invited every chief engineer and assistant engineer in the region to come together and vote on what they think the software solution that they wanted. Ultimately, I mean, we saw 11 different software packages, and there were some solutions that I thought were going to work best. But end of the day, the engineers are the ones using the software, and they're the ones who need to buy in. I can't explain the number of times I've gone to a region over the years where we've implemented some new process from New York, and you get to the region or a specific building, and the engineer looks at you and says, yeah, that was a New York decision, doesn't work here. They didn't really take ownership of it. So we wanted to make sure that they owned this process and ultimately owned the outcomes from the system. So fortunately, after going through and engaging all the engineers, we did have a clear winner in Mach Energy. So we'll now kind of go into some of the competencies of that system and how we are utilizing some of the kind of specific applications and parts of the program. So starting at a very high level, kind of with the enterprise level reporting, or the sort of reporting that I tend to look at to get ideas of where we need to focus our resources. This is an example of, you know, a report that comes out that just shows our usage in, you know, per square foot occupied across our portfolio. So just trying to get an idea, you know, apples to apples comparison per square foot. What do our buildings cost to operate? Just to give us an idea where we can start focusing on the biggest users and the biggest consumers. Another report that I find very useful, once we kind of identify, you know, what buildings we want to go into, there's this operations report that we can run that will show variability of the different operating metrics here by building. So you can get a good idea in a region, you know, who's starting early, who's starting late, number of early shutdowns, you know, so operationally taking a look at how the buildings compare to each other at a high level. You know, ultimately, this is really only useful in helping kind of drive the conversation towards a building, because there's a lot of reasons why you may start up early for a day or late on another day, but this helps me get a good idea at a portfolio level, what are the opportunities available and sort of what are the you know, specific opportunities of the buildings. So translating that down more to the building level, here's an example of the dashboard at a building level that I would get when I log in. And I think this is great because it provides a lot of information in a very short amount of time right up front. So you get a visualization, how much energy you're using in real time as the day goes on. We're getting a view of how we're using energy demand, how the energy demand is changing in real time. And then also this software is taking a look at day ahead temperatures to project what we will use in the next several days to try and give you a heads up if you think you might set a new peak. So if you know tomorrow's going to be hot, the system can help estimate where it thinks your peak might be for the day. So maybe you can take some operational strategies ahead of time to prevent hitting that new peak, setting a new peak for the month. The trends calendar here really provides a quick overview of improvement opportunities and lets you know when the building has had you know, a high demand day or high operating expense day. Really compares the daily performance over time of the building. Obviously you can track your Energy Star score, and this widget here, the performance versus expected, is interesting. It allows for a historic performance analysis of the building. So really taking a look at what the software thinks you should use versus how much you actually use. And then the last two widgets on here that I wanted to highlight are more probably property manager focused, but really allows you to track your budget month to date and year to date. And this other tool down here allows you to calculate electricity accruals for an incomplete billing period. So if your billing period isn't lined up, on a calendar month, and you need to provide accruals for 15 days of usage in the end of July, you can use this tool to calculate what the cost was for your actual usage and then what the projected is. So I'll dive in a little more on some of these widgets, provide a little more color about how we use them and how they're beneficial to us. So the expected operating profile here really provides a view of the historic view of a building. So takes all of the consumption that we've historically done and then normalizes it for weather, seasonality, occupancy, day of the week. And then it creates an expected band here, the green band, that is kind of on an average day based on your average performance. This is how your building should perform. And on time, it adds in your real-time data so you can see if you're trending high or low and then provide an opportunity for operator intervention to help prevent excessive usage or above what we'd expect. One great thing about this algorithm in the mock software is that it's a learning algorithm. So if you did a capital project, for instance, installed LED lighting in the lobby and you have a permanent, say 100 kW reduction, the software will figure that out and it will make that part of the expected band. And then, again, recreates a profile based on the things that the operator will be able to control. So we found this to be very useful. It also has an alerting function so that you can send text messages, emails, alerts on the dashboard screen to let you know when you're approaching a certain threshold of usage or low. The other way too, you may have a critical system that should never be off, a UPS, something like that, and you can see if that drops. Again, you can get a alert from the system. At Trends Calendar, the other kind of way we get information to the operators concerning performance opportunities comes through this trends calculator. So as opposed to the previous widget, which is looking at building over building performance within a building, this is really taking a look at a larger data set and comparing your building to other buildings in your similar size and climate zone. So really taking a look at your consumption patterns, comparing them to your peers, and trying to give you opportunities where you may be able to save some money. So these are pretty high level, but include things like early startups, late startups, excessive time to turn down at the end of the day, weekend opportunities. But this, again, is really taking a look and comparing against a larger building set so that you can track how your building performance is compared to similar buildings nearby. Demand management tool is something that we have found to be pretty useful for two reasons. First, it does provide a pretty good visualization of your demand in real time so that you're able to see when you set a new peak, what your peak will be. Then you can understand the billing implications of that. But then also does provide this opportunity for a look ahead, based on upcoming weather and operating conditions. It will project out where it thinks your peak demand may be. And again, so that you can take some action to prevent setting a new peak if that's the goal. The other part of this software that's very useful is that we were able to integrate with our demand response provider. So we don't have to go to a separate dashboard. We're able to pull in automatically, whenever there's an event, demand response event, or pull in the levels that we need to hit, so we can track everything in the same dashboard, so it's not going back and forth between multiple software packages. Another extremely useful part of this tool, the overall mock tool, is this tariff engine. So it provides information on the cost components of our utility expense, so down to the consumption, demand, taxes, delivery. This really helps us manage our costs and our third-party supplier costs, but also provides us some really good insight into M&V, because it's actually calculating our savings based on the actual tariff of the building, and not just back of the envelope, 7 cents a kilowatt hour, 9 cents a kilowatt hour. This is actually tailored towards our specific supply contracts. So the M&V tool is something that we find pretty useful. Allows us to track the actual cost savings, which is great for the engineers too, because they can go back and verify the assumptions they made when they made the project. So, a vendor can come in and back into a 1.5 year payback for any project out there. But at least when we run this through the mock software, we at least know the exact energy costs and implications on our end. Last piece I really want to highlight here is our competition widget. This is something new that we are developing this quarter and rolling out to our buildings. So the thought here is that we are trying to incentivize reduction from expected performance. So every building has that band of expected performance. We're trying to incentivize our engineers to be as far below that as possible. And the reason we wanted to do it, compare it against expected versus just a historic, year over year reduction, is because we wanted to try and control for capital projects. We have 64 buildings across the United States. Each one of them is owned in an individual entity, and not all of them are as well capitalized. So we don't always have the capital available to necessarily do large scale reduction projects. But we wanted to use this tool to still incentivize the operators. So if a building does a large capital project, that ultimately becomes part of the expected band. So again, we can, they'll get us a short-term gain from having the capital project implemented. But end of the day, that'll ultimately get baked into the expected profile. And now we're coming back to how are the building operators intervening, and how is that ultimately driving energy reduction? So that's part of the presentation I was going to focus on, and then I'll stop sharing and turn it back over to you, Hannah.
Great. Thanks so much, Ryan. That was really, really helpful to see all your different aspects of the way you use the tools, and see a lot of similarities in how Jamestown and Tishman Speyer take a look at their data. So I wanted to just get the questions rolling now with a few questions before Elliot takes over. And this is often something that we hear from participants in the program, the campaign, asking about how did you build your business case and get started to invest in not only the energy information system, but the metering that was required to get to where you're at right now. So how did you make that initial investment, and have you had to make any additional kind of, annually? Do you have to, reprove out that investment and the cost over time? How do you handle that with your management? So, Becca, do you want to take a first stab at that one? I'm going to unmute Becca here.
There
we go.
Okay, great. For us, I think with those first 5 buildings, we didn't roll this out portfolio-wide initially. We took some time to kind of introduce the concept, choose assets that, had the budget. And it really wasn't until 2016, I would say, Ed. I think that's when we began, you know, the AquaCore platform. We didn't do anything portfolio-wide. You know, we kind of targeted properties where it made sense. And for those properties, we certainly made sure that it was budgeted for annually. You know, for better or for worse, you know, have never had a ton of success doing things portfolio-wide. We just have a lot of diversity in our portfolio, and there's very few things that you could just roll out and kind of clone and apply to all of your properties. You know, where we have had a lot of consistency is with our Jamestown Urban Management Partnership, and you know, that's where we have Lincoln property managers and in almost all cases engineers at the buildings. And so I think that's one of the reasons that the AquaCore partnership has been successful. It was really engineering led, and just candidly, I think that first pilot, Ed, you probably agree, it was a little more sustainability led. And, you know, I just think psychologically, it's one of the reasons that the AquaCore partnership has seen a little more utilization from the building team.
The AquaCore partnership with Lincoln, it really started with ownership asking us, what can we do to be more competitive in the marketplace? You know, energy is one, it's just a part of OpEx. It's a very competitive market, especially in the DC area. We have a lot of product. So if you can reduce your operating expense by 5-7% on your electrical, that's huge. So Lincoln was really approached by we're a third-party management group, and we have a lot of different ownerships across the country, and they came to us asking us for the solutions, so we went to the market looking for the solutions.
Great, thanks, Becca and Ed. Ryan, do you want to chime in on this one about the business case?
Yeah, so we went the exact opposite of the track that Jamestown took. We just went all in up front with our entire portfolio. And for us, the decision was actually really written by our investors. So we are participants in RES, which has over the last 5 years really increased focus on asset level performance and actually documenting asset level performance. So for us, this was an opportunity for us to demonstrate long-term value to our investors. So that's from a cost standpoint, how we were able to get through our properties down to the building level. And then, you know, want to echo what Ed just said, because once we kind of came to the properties with this solution, a lot of the engineers figured out right away how they could use this to really drive down their operating expenses, which excited the leasing people of the buildings, because, you know, everything we can reduce occupancy, cost per square foot is an advantage in the market, and specifically a market like DC, as alluded to. So for us, it's really been more investor driven, and combining that with a shift of strategy to a longer term hold. So we're less concerned with making sure we can get you know, a very quick payback on the dashboard. We're taking a much longer view of our assets now. So you know, the investor pull plus the longer term holding our assets has really allowed us to get to where we are.
Great, thanks, Ryan. I'm going to move on to a question that came from the audience that I actually helped Jamestown with the answer to, so I'm going to help them answer it. So the question was, how many input variables and time periods are used to calculate the predictive band? So that was the question for the AquaCore predictive band. And initially that wasn't apparent, so we asked AquaCore, and basically they create 2 models, one for working hours and one for non-working hours. So occupied versus unoccupied is a variable model, and time of day and outside air temperature. So they're using a pretty, I would say a pretty solid way of looking at the predicted energy use, and they've incorporated that into that predicted band. So, Becca, I answered that question for you. But the next question is, you can take, Becca, is, does AquaCore generate the targets, or does staff manually input the targets? And I know we also worked on this, but you want to take that one?
Yeah, and frankly, I'm not sure if AquaCore can kind of generate like a standard target, but it's really something that staff should implement.
Yeah, and what we found that AquaCore could take kind of some historical values, but it was pretty crude, so we had to kind of tune it in, right, for the building.
Plus, I think that it's a great opportunity to actually like collaborate and kind of get that building level input. I mean, you know, we didn't see a lot of paranoia from the building engineers. Most kind of saw this as like another tool in their toolbox, but I think it helps to make the property level folks part of the conversation.
Yes, absolutely. Elliot, can you throw in a few more questions? We don't have much time left here.
Yeah, you bet. Yeah, I had one interesting question. Would you be able to comment how this software is different from ISO 50001? I'm curious if Jamestown or Tishman Speyer are sort of aligning with ISO 50001 and how your software relates to that. Otherwise, we could just give a more general answer.
Jamestown is not. I don't know a ton about ISO 15001.
Okay. And Ryan, do you have any comments on that?
I would echo that. We're very in the infant stages of really trying to implement any sort of ISO energy or EMS standard, so I can't really
okay.
Very well.
Okay. Well, I can certainly comment generally. Oh, Hannah, you're going to say something?
No, go ahead. We were going to say the same thing. So.
Well, I was just going to say that generally ISO 50001 is really an all-encompassing energy management standard. So looking at how you set up your team, how you report on energy use, set targets, it's very organizational focused. And the software that we've seen today is really a tool that can help with that process. It's a tool to help you manage and get visibility on the energy data. The ISO standard is pretty active on the industrial side, but less so on the commercial. So that's generally my understanding how I'd frame that up. Hannah, do we have time for any additional comments, or you think we need to wrap it up here?
Well, maybe the last one about the normalization in addition to square foot would be one to end on, maybe.
Yeah, so this comment came in during the Jamestown presentation, but could go to both presentations. So to help with targeting buildings, is there any normalization in addition to dollars per square foot or EUI, for example, normalizing by building type, previous savings, number of occupants? So I'll put that to Becca first, I think.
I'm honestly blinking a little bit, and I don't want to misspeak. Hannah, I don't know if this was something you dug in more with them on the technical side, or Ed, if you're aware. But off the top of my head, I'm not sure.
Your system is pretty much on by square footage in terms of normalization, and that's really the most common out there. You also can sort of state the number of occupants, but that's not kind of a variable. It's hard to track that, honestly. So the only other one we've kind of seen from others is pretty interesting. From one of the universities tracks meals served, and so they're able to do in their dining halls energy use per meal served, and they have that data stream coming in for every day.
That's interesting. The other one that we try and use at Tishman Speyer is trying to account that occupancy. So we're normalizing for occupied square footage. It's not just square footage, so that we can try and get an apples to apples.
Yeah. Yeah. So if you don't have parts of your buildings occupied, that's good to to track. Well, unfortunately, we're out of time. We could have used a little more time. Obviously, we always have lots of questions. We'll follow up with the folks that had questions that weren't answered yet directly. But here's our information in case you're interested in learning more about the campaign or recommending someone you know. If you're a service provider or vendor, you can help bring someone into the campaign and work with us on that. So we really appreciate our presenters, Becca, Ed, and Ryan, and their time they put into putting these presentations together.